I was grabbing coffee with an old friend last week, someone I hadn't seen since the 2026 economic shift really started to bite. For years, he was the guy who valued independence above all else, living in a sleek, minimalist studio, proud that he didn't owe his family a single minute of his time. But when I asked how he was holding up, he didn't complain about the inflation or the crushing rent. He just smiled and showed me a photo on his phone. It wasn't a new gadget or a vacation. It was a picture of a renovated garage. He'd moved back in with his parents and his sister's family. But here's the thing. He didn't look defeated. He looked like he'd just won a war. He started describing their daily routine like he was narrating a military operation. My father handles the morning school run for the kids, my sister manages the bulk buy logistics, and I've diverted my rent money into a family investment pool, he told me. His eyes lit up with a cold, calculated satisfaction. He wasn't just staying there, he was part of a command center. I expected him to feel stifled, but he told me something that stayed with me. I used to think living alone was a sign of success. Now I realize it was just being an easy target. That shift in his voice, from the pride of a lone wolf to the quiet confidence of someone inside a fortress, really made me think. For nearly a century, we've been told that the atomized individual life was the peak of human progress. We were taught to trade the burden of kinship for the freedom of the market. But as the 2026 data now shows, that experiment is hitting a wall. We aren't just seeing a change in housing, we are witnessing the terminal failure of a myth. Is the return to the multi-generational household a step backward into the past? Or is it the only realistic fortress left for a civilization that has finally reached its breaking point? So that anecdote, it really points to a radical and I think urgent shift. People are trading this romantic ideal of individual freedom for the sheer necessity of collective security.
Yeah, and we've been provided with sources that analyze this exact phenomenon. They're asking, is the return to multi-generational living just a stopgap, a survival strategy? Or is it a practical economic fortress against all this instability? Or, and this is a big question, is it maybe something much larger, a civilizational firewall?
Right.
And that's our mission today, to do a deep dive into the source material and understand why kinship, of all things, is suddenly the ultimate security asset.
What's so fascinating here is how the sources frame this whole discussion. It moves way, way beyond simple financial planning.
Oh, absolutely.
It becomes this critical examination of two fundamentally different sociopolitical models that are playing out right now on the global stage. You have the trajectory of hyperindividualism that, really defined the late 20th century West,
versus the enduring familialist model that has anchored East Asia for centuries. So we have to clearly define what this collective living actually is, and more importantly, understand why, globally, the atomized nuclear family, the standard bearer of Western modernity, is reaching what the sources call its terminal failure point.
Terminal failure point. That's a strong phrase.
It is. And the strategic resurgence of these multi-generational households, which are material highlights, particularly in the East Asian context, it's presented as this high-efficiency economic fortress. It's designed for resource optimization and, critically, intergenerational wealth preservation, a direct countermeasure to, the fiscal decadence and social welfare collapse seen elsewhere.
So that raises the stakes immediately. We aren't just talking about a housing trend. We're looking at fundamentally reconstructing social structures for long-term survival, stability, and wealth preservation. So let's start there. Let's define this new structure. What does generational housing actually look like on the ground?
Well, from a macro perspective, the sources make it very clear. Generational housing is much more profound than just, sharing an address to save a little money.
Right. It sounds like a philosophical decision as much as a fiscal one.
It is. The core meaning is that it's a conscious, intentional choice to interweave lives, to foster collective existence and mutual support. It's an institutional commitment to the unit, really, whether that unit is based on blood or even just shared values.
So it's not always family, then?
Not always. It typically includes the traditional model, grandparents, parents, children. But our sources really broaden this definition. It also extends to unrelated individuals of differing ages who opt for a communal lifestyle. And this reflects a deep-seated human desire for connection and for a built-in support system right there in the home itself.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a powerful countercurrent to the prevailing ideal we've been sold for so many decades.
Precisely. For decades, the dominant cultural ideal in the West was the individualistic, atomized life, right? Often represented by the nuclear family, isolated in his own single-family home.
That was the dream. the aspirational symbol of having made it.
Exactly. But now our sources point out that that very model is under heavy scrutiny for its immense environmental and social costs. And generational housing, well, it offers a compelling, adaptive, and frankly, a practical alternative. It fulfills a deep-seated human need for belonging and acknowledges that a smaller collective footprint can yield significant, measurable benefits, something that isolationist model just can't deliver.
The idea that the single-family home, the pinnacle of the American dream, is now being recast as ecologically and socially inefficient, that's a massive cultural reversal. It transitions the discussion from social ideals to hard resource metrics.
Absolutely. And when we look at the ecology and the resource efficiency of shared lives, the data is, well, it's compelling. By consolidating living spaces and centralizing resources, the overall demand for things like sheeting, cooling, water, transportation, it's naturally and drastically reduced.
And this aligns perfectly with sustainable living principles, often without requiring you to be like an ideological environmental activist.
Right, it's just functional, it's practical.
You mentioned resource cycling earlier. How does that work practically in a collective setting like this?
So from a systems thinking perspective, the shared household operates as a highly efficient microcosm of a circular economy. Resources, whether they are financial, material, or even human labor, they cycle with greater velocity and efficiency among all the members.
So less waste.
Far less. The reduced need for separate utility connections, individual lawns, multiple identical large appliances, like washers and dryers, it directly decreases the per capita environmental load dramatically.
And this isn't just a theory. The source material gives us some genuinely striking quantitative proof of this efficiency from a long-running intentional community. What does that hard data tell us?
Okay, so we have specific efficiency metrics from the Twin Oaks community in Virginia. It's a secular intentional community founded way back in 1967 based on principles of cooperation and sustainability.
And their data.
Their data illustrates the potential of this model at scale. Twin Oaks members consume a shocking 70% less gasoline, 80% less electricity, and 76% less natural gas per capita than their neighbors in conventional single-family homes nearby.
70 to 80%, that's staggering. That level of efficiency is only possible through extreme resource centralization, I have to assume.
It's a direct result of comprehensive resource sharing and collective consumption. At Twin Oaks, resources are held in common, everything except, personal items they keep in their private bedrooms.
So instead of 100 people having 100 cars...
Exactly. Instead of 100 individual cars, they share a fleet of just 17 vehicles, which makes transportation a scheduled, collaborative effort. And consider clothing, for example. They run a large clothing library. Instead of everyone buying and maintaining a huge, underused personal wardrobe, they share this massive central closet. It reduces waste and consumption drastically.
That's resource cycling in its most tangible daily form.
It really is.
And beyond the utility bills and the gas tanks, this collective model has to reduce the structural pressure on the land itself.
Oh, absolutely. That's the land use optimization component. Fewer individual homes mean less demand for residential construction, which significantly reduces urban sprawl and minimizes pressure on undeveloped land. And that preserved land, in turn, supports biodiversity and ecosystem services, the natural processes we all rely on, like clean water and air. In a highly urbanized, resource-constrained future, this collective housing model is presented as a crucial strategy for managing our natural capital.
Okay, so we've established the environmental and systemic efficiency is huge. But for most Western families moving back home, the most immediate driving factor has to be the economic resilience it provides. It transforms that highly exposed individual into, like, a shareholder in an economic fortress.
Precisely. The financial advantages stem powerfully and immediately from pooling resources. Families collectively contribute to the massive fixed costs of modern life. Mortgage payments, utilities, property taxes, groceries. This shared economic responsibility substantially reduces those individual financial burdens that lead to precarity and short-term debt.
And the money you save is capital that can be immediately redeployed.
Exactly. When you are no longer paying 3 separate heating bills and 3 separate water bills, the savings are significant. The shared model frees up substantial funds for savings, investments, or rapid debt repayment. It improves the overall financial security and capital accumulation potential for all the household members, something that is almost impossible for a young professional who's struggling with solo rent.
And that capital accumulation is key to the long-term strategic advantage this model offers. This isn't just about managing debt, it's about building lasting assets.
Correct. The generational household provides a concrete opportunity for pooled investment, particularly in property. By combining the wealth and the earning potential of 2 or 3 generations, the unit can accelerate building equity, it can purchase larger or more secure assets, and it enhances long-term security in a way that is increasingly out of reach for those atomized nuclear families. It becomes a mechanism for intergenerational wealth preservation.
That's a very strong financial argument, but the true game changer, as you said earlier, is the human element. That reciprocal caregiving ecosystem that stabilizes the family's finances and well-being.
That's where the human resource cycling happens, turning social capital into economic stability. The financial benefits are compounded exponentially by built-in low-cost caregiving. Grandparents who are often retired or semi-retired can provide low-cost, high-quality childcare,
which alleviates the astronomical burden of external daycare. For many young families, that's a crippling financial drain, often equivalent to a second rent or mortgage payment.
a huge strain, and the flow of support goes both ways.
In mutual aid.
Exactly. Simultaneously, adult children support their aging parents, which allows for aging in place. This avoids the prohibitive and, frankly, emotionally taxing cost of institutional care, which can rapidly liquidate decades of savings. This system of reciprocal support stabilizes the family's long-term fiscal health against the 2 greatest financial shocks of modern life, childcare costs and elder care costs.
And beyond the economics, the sources point to a profound psychological buffer provided by this model. I mean, hyperindividualism often comes with a real emotional toll, and the collective seems to address that directly.
It acts as a robust psychological buffer against the isolation and fragmentation of modern life. Loneliness and social isolation are often overlooked public health crises in the West. For seniors, regular daily interaction with family, not scheduled visits, but constant organic contact, significantly reduces loneliness and depression, which studies suggest may even enhance longevity and cognitive function.
And for the children, the benefits have to extend beyond just having a built-in babysitter.
Oh, absolutely. For children, studies suggest improved mental health and higher levels of cognition and social support. They benefit from a wider, richer network of mentors, role models, and attachment figures. They gain a diverse set of social skills by interacting daily with multiple generations and personalities.
And that constant flow of connection provides a sense of purpose for everyone involved.
It does. It gives all residents a powerful sense of purpose and belonging, from the child learning to garden with a grandparent to the adult child knowing they are directly contributing to their parents' dignity and security. This intentional arrangement also acts as a powerful vessel for cultural preservation. It ensures the smooth and organic transfer of traditions, stories, and languages across generations, grounding everyone in a shared history and collective identity. In an age where digital culture and globalization often fracture identity, this daily cultural continuity is profoundly protective.
The moment you start talking about built-in caregiving, the necessity of this collective fortress becomes brutally clear when we examine the immense pressure currently placed on the generation in the middle, the sandwich generation. And here's where it gets really interesting in the source material.
Yeah, the sources define this crisis as a central fact of modern demographics. The sandwich generation refers to middle-aged adults who find themselves simultaneously caring for dependent children and aging parents.
And it's a relatively new demographic squeeze, right?
Right, it is. It's exacerbated by 2 powerful converging trends. People are having children later in life, and modern medicine has significantly extended human lifespans. The result is a prolonged, simultaneous period of dual dependency.
And this isn't a fixed cohort like baby boomers or millennials. It's a dynamic role that can affect any middle-aged adult caught between these 2 immense simultaneous dependency needs.
That's right. And Carol Abaya, who is an expert on elder care, provided a useful way to categorize the types of stress involved based on the specific layers of burden these adults are managing. The first is the traditional sandwich. Those dealing with aging parents who need physical or financial care, and their own dependent children. That's the core 2-layer squeeze.
But the pressure often increases as longevity extends, leading to the multi-layered scenario,
which she calls the club sandwich. These are typically those in their 40s to 60s who are caring for aging parents, maybe even elderly grandparents.
Wow.
And their adult children who have moved back home, and sometimes even their young grandchildren.
Managing 3 or even 4 layers of human need and dependency simultaneously. That sounds like a logistical and emotional impossibility.
It's exhausting, and it speaks to the severity of the structural crisis. And finally, she defines the open-faced sandwich, which acknowledges that caregiving burdens are complex and varied, covering anyone else significantly involved in elder care who doesn't fit neatly into the first two categories. The crisis is universal, driven by demography, but the economic and cultural response varies dramatically.
Let's focus on the U.S. context for a second, where the individualist model makes this burden particularly acute. The sources quantify the financial and time costs, and they are truly staggering. This isn't just an emotional struggle, it's a measurable economic drain on the U.S. workforce.
It is a massive economic drain. U.S. adults in the sandwich situation are spending approximately $10,000 and dedicating 350 hours per year combined on their parents and children.
1,350 hours.
Yes. To put that in perspective, 350 hours is over 33 full 40-hour work weeks dedicated solely to uncompensated caregiving labor.
That's nearly a quarter of an entire year's potential working time just absorbed by care.
Exactly. And historically, the needs are bifurcated. Children require care that is heavily capital intensive. Tuition, clothing, activities, future savings. Aging adults, however, demand labor-intensive care assistance with daily living, mobility, medication management, and general physical and emotional support. The sandwich generation is responsible for delivering both intensive capital and intensive labor at the same time.
And the sources highlight that the burden of that labor is not distributed equally across genders.
No, the data clearly exposes the pervasive gendered labor involved here. While the phenomenon affects both sexes, women are overwhelmingly seen by society and family structures as the primary supporters. They handle the emotional and most of the intimate physical care, bathing, dressing, cleaning, managing appointments, the essential labor-intensive components. Men typically, though not exclusively, focus on providing the financial support.
This disproportionate labor burden has massive long-term consequences, not just for the individual, but for the entire economy.
It places huge risks on the female caregivers. They face severe risks of stress, burnout, depression, and a profound loss of personal time. But crucially, they face a serious risk of career development loss. They are often at the peak of their career potential, needing to maximize earnings to support the whole structure, but the intense caregiving demands strip away the time, the energy, and the focus needed to advance that career. You hear them say they constantly feel pulled in two directions.
It's a systemic double bind. You need to earn more, but your caregiving duties prevent you from reaching that earning potential, which only exacerbates the family's long-term financial insecurity.
It's a self-perpetuating cycle of constraint. They're forced to take career detours, pass up promotions, or even leave the workforce entirely, which not only impacts their current income, but dramatically reduces their lifetime earnings and, critically, their retirement savings. And this just makes the entire family unit more fragile when they eventually become the aging generation.
This brings us to the prevalence in East Asia, where the multi-generational model is historically stronger, but the pressures are still intense. This results in these unique manifestations of the sandwich crisis that are now informing state policy.
This is absolutely critical for understanding the policy shift we're about to discuss. Take South Korea. Despite having a strong Confucian tradition of family support, it has the highest number of sandwich generation members among major Asian countries.
Why is that?
The roots of their particular crisis are they're rooted in national history. The aggressive economic renewal that was required after the Korean War meant that the surviving generations prioritized national rebuilding and economic mobilization over personal savings for old age. This created a profound structural dependency on their adult children decades later.
Wow, that's a powerful illustration of how national economic policy can directly dictate family structure and burden 2 generations down the line.
Indeed. In China, the scale is just immense. Our sources show that approximately 1/3 of adults aged 45-64 have at least one parent or parent-in-law and a younger grandchild who needs care. This reflects the scale of co-residence and support required across 3 or even 4 generations, particularly as internal migration and urbanization strain traditional village networks.
And then there's the truly unique crisis of the sandwich class in dense, hyper-expensive urban hubs like Singapore and Hong Kong. This isn't purely about demographic burden. It's about a severe financial squeeze, despite what most people would consider to be high incomes.
This is a crucial distinction. It's an economic paradox born of extreme housing commodification. In Singapore and Hong Kong, the term sandwich class refers to middle-class families with incomes significantly above average. For example, household incomes between, say, US $20,000 and $40,000 in Hong Kong, or an SGD $10,000 household income in Singapore. By global standards, these are high earners.
Yet they are financially trapped sandwiched. Why?
Because of stratospheric real estate costs and the structure of public services, these families are financially trapped between two distinct groups. The large percentage of the population that qualifies for and relies on public housing and government assistance, and the smaller number of ultra-wealthy individuals who can actually afford private luxury residences and property outright.
So they earn too much to receive significant state support, but not nearly enough to compete with global capital in the housing market.
Precisely. They are pulled between supporting their aging parents, who often need medical attention, and their growing children, who often need expensive education, all while being unable to afford private property or a commensurate high-income lifestyle. The multi-generational arrangement in this context is often not a choice for cultural continuity, but an absolute financial necessity just to maintain a precarious hold on a middle-class existence in these hypercities. Now we can shift from the problem of the sandwich generation crisis to the strategic response from the state. We're moving into East Asia's policy blueprint, where the family unit is often viewed as a vital extension of state capacity and a high-efficiency, low-cost governance model.
And this is where policy fundamentally diverges from the Western liberal tradition. It's rooted in a cultural system that views kinship as the primary source of welfare, starting with the Confucian legacy and the concept of familialism.
Absolutely. The core belief in East Asia, unlike in most Western societies, has historically been that both the elderly and dependent children must rely exclusively on their families to meet their dependency needs. This system is known as familialism, where the household is structurally assigned the maximum of welfare obligations. The strength and resilience of the Confucian family model provided a very effective non-state social safety net for centuries.
Which means the state could focus entirely on economic growth because the family unit was handling all of the social costs.
Exactly. But economic modernization, urbanization, population aging, rising female labor participation, all of this inevitably challenged that structure. And our sources trace this policy evolution through three distinct stages of development in East Asia.
Okay, let's start with the economic mobilization phase.
That was the first stage, Confucian family strong. During periods of rapid industrialization, the developmental state phase governments focused intensely on economic growth and full employment. The welfare state institution was intentionally underdeveloped, and the Confucian family acted as the primary, highly effective welfare provider, caring for all non-working members. China, for instance, during its early economic opening, it mirrored the 1970s phase of Japan's development. The family was the uncompensated labor force of the welfare system.
But rapid growth creates demands that eventually break the traditional system, right?
That leads to the second stage, the Confucian family challenged phase. Economic restructuring shifted these economies toward post-industrial, knowledge, and service-based models. This created a massive demand for highly educated women to enter the professional workforce.
Which weakened the old patriarchal gender division.
Exactly. Women became less willing and often less able due to their careers to shoulder the intense double burden of being both wage earners and primary caregivers. The result: low fertility rates, delayed marriage, and fast accelerating population aging.
And this failing family safety net then necessitated a state response, bringing us to the third stage.
The developmental welfare under pressure phase. As the family falters and the traditional dependency system becomes dysfunctional, the state faces intensifying political pressure. This comes from social movements, from women demanding a better work-life balance, and from political opposition, especially when economic growth slows. So reform of social policy, particularly around childcare and elder care, becomes a common measure to relieve public distress and stabilize the workforce.
So the state is forced to intervene, but not necessarily to become a social democratic welfare provider. It maintains its focus on supporting the economy.
That's the key distinction. The overall policy orientation is shifting from the previous non-interventionist model, where state support was kept low, relying almost entirely on the market and the family, towards what the sources call the pro-traditional model. In this new model, the state selectively supports families to help them preserve their traditional roles.
So they're intervening, but only to reinforce the family unit. Essentially, they're subsidizing its caregiving function, not replacing it entirely with government services. So what are the three core characteristics of this emerging East Asian policy model?
There is a clear convergence across the region, even if the pace differs.
Let's start with how they view welfare provision in relation to employment.
First, the model is defined by work-centered welfare. The fundamental idea remains deeply embedded. Individuals must support their families primarily through continuous paid work. Consequently, direct welfare provisions, especially for non-workers, are often minimal.
So leave arrangements are not generous, I'm guessing.
Not at all. Maternity leave can be short, and paternity or comprehensive parental leave is often absent or limited. Cash allowances are typically heavily means-tested. The state's goal is not the universal decommodification of welfare, meaning making essential services free from market pricing, but rather to provide enough selective support to enable wage earners to balance work and family obligations without exiting the labor market.
Okay, so if universal decommodification is the Western social democratic ideal like offering free state-provided healthcare or childcare for everyone, the East Asian model is basically saying, we'll just help you juggle the market and family duties.
Exactly. It's a focus on labor market optimization, not universal social equality. The second characteristic is how they fund these supports. Public-private co-financing. Due to that non-interventionist history, East Asian states resist fully financing or directly providing all care services. They prefer to act as a finance provider rather than a service provider. They draw upon private resources, whether that's mandatory contributions or encouraging private market delivery, like Japan's long-term care insurance system.
Which keeps the state budget lighter but shifts the cost onto individuals and private enterprise.
Precisely. And the third characteristic is the type of care favored. A comprehensive social care system that prioritizes home-based and community-based care over large-scale institutional care. This is crucial for sustaining the cultural ideal that caregiving remains within the family or the immediate neighborhood network. New state initiatives are designed explicitly to assist the family in providing care, rather than relieving them of the responsibility entirely.
Okay, let's turn to the case studies, starting with Japan. They were the first to confront these massive aging challenges and economic stagnation. How did they pivot?
Japan provides the foundational case study for modern East Asian policy reform. They were forced to transform from a deeply traditional post-war model built on that rigid male breadwinner female homemaker division to a more interventionist approach after severe economic stagnation and intense political competition in the 1990s. This really demonstrated the limit of relying solely on the family when economic growth faltered.
So what were their major interventions to prop up the family unit?
Their policy focus was dual: expanding public support for care services while simultaneously accommodating the rising female labor participation rate. The most famous example is the long-term care insurance, or LTCI, launched in 2000. This was a landmark moment, the first time an Asian country provided public financing for elderly care in both community and institutional settings, though they still heavily prioritized community settings.
And they also addressed childcare.
Yes, they introduced the Angel Plan and the New Angel Plan to aggressively expand high-quality childcare services, spurred by the alarming low fertility rate recorded in 1989, what they called the 1.57 shock.
Yet, despite these massive nationally financed reforms, the sources indicate the burden hasn't significantly shifted from the family.
It hasn't fully lifted, no. Despite substantial public financing and service expansion, families in Japan still provide an estimated 75% to 80% of overall care responsibilities. Frustration remains acute, particularly regarding the scarcity and inflexibility of high-quality, affordable childcare, especially in dense urban centers. Japan's approach remains firmly rooted in that pro-traditional model. They're willing to finance care, but they are highly reluctant to fully socialize the provision of that care.
Moving to South Korea, their policy shift seems less gradual and more driven by a sudden external crisis.
That's right. The 1997 Asian financial crisis and the subsequent political reforms were the turning point that jolted South Korea away from its previously non-interventionist stance. They realized structural stability required state intervention. They are now actively adopting what is called a social investment strategy, aimed at systematically integrating social development with economic goals.
The sources refer to this as productivism redefined. What exactly does that mean in terms of care?
South Korea is specifically aiming to commodify previously uncommodified care work. Instead of seeing care as purely a drain on the public purse, they view care services as a new growth engine for the economy, creating jobs and stimulating the service sector.
So they have two objectives here.
Two interrelated objectives, yes. First, freeing women from informal care work to spur their participation in the paid labor market, which boosts the economy. And second, spurring economic growth by socializing care provision, largely through private-public partnership models.
That sounds like a powerful strategy for modernization. Yet the sources reveal a profound cultural paradox in South Korea regarding highly educated women.
This paradox is the clearest illustration of the cultural friction created by the state's approach. Korea is the only OECD country where women with a university education actually have a lower labor force participation rate than those with less education.
Wait, highly educated women are less likely to be in the paid workforce. Why would that be?
It highlights that the economic incentives and service provisions just aren't enough to overcome the deeply entrenched traditional gender division of labor. The professional workplace practices, which demand extremely long hours, coupled with significant gender wage gaps, act as a powerful disincentive. The high care expectations imposed by the strong traditional culture are simply too heavy for the market structure to absorb without full, universal state support. The highly educated women often have the most demanding careers, making the double burden logistically impossible, and that forces them out.
And finally, we turn to China, characterized as a latecomer in comprehensive welfare reform. How does their model fit into this spectrum?
China currently resembles the earlier, more productivist stages we saw historically in Japan and Korea. The Confucian family still acts as the dominant welfare institution, fitting into a productivist welfare orientation, where social policy is largely subordinated to maximizing economic strategy.
So minimal intervention from Beijing on social care, then.
The government's formal involvement in widespread state-provided childcare and elderly care is relatively limited. They prefer to leave these functions to the market and the family, making the model closer to the non-interventionist ideal. They're still relying heavily on kinship networks for livelihood support and caregiving.
But the state there can intervene aggressively when it wants to.
Oh, absolutely. They intervene aggressively and suddenly when it aligns with massive national economic or social goals, like the historic implementation and subsequent reversal of the one-child policy. Any recent care provision reforms, like pilot community-based care systems, are primarily accommodations to broader economic reform like managing the effects of rapid aging, rather than comprehensive welfare initiatives in their own right.
So across East Asia, we see this foundational pattern. The family is the default economic and welfare institution. The state only steps in when that family unit starts to fail due to the pressures of modernization. And even then, the intervention is meticulously designed to prop up, finance, and reinforce the family's traditional role, never to replace it entirely. They maintain the family as a high-efficiency economic fortress.
Right.
Okay, so if we connect all this to the bigger picture, the question becomes, why does multi-generational living feel like a fortress in the West, yet in East Asia, it's a policy blueprint for state stability? Our source material suggests the very concept of the collective has been systematically attacked and undermined in Western societies.
This moves us into a profound sociological and geopolitical critique of Western governance structures. The sources contend that the erosion of social cohesion in the West is not a passive, inevitable consequence of societal evolution.
What is it then, according to them?
It is presented as the result of deliberate psychological, economic, and cultural manipulation orchestrated by financial elites and corporate entities. The impulse you see to form a fortress is simply a rational defense against this engineered disintegration.
Engineered disintegration and systematic manipulation, those are heavy claims that require careful examination. What are the specific tactics the source material suggests these elites use to create this fragmentation?
Well, the primary tactic described is a systematic psychological strategy, the sources term elite gaslighting. This is designed to make populations doubt their objective reality, question their own experiences, and fundamentally distrust their neighbors, thus fracturing society into isolated, easily controlled units.
And it breaks down those traditional community bonds.
Exactly. Traditional institutions that once fostered horizontal trust and collective identity unions, churches, local sports clubs, fraternal and hobby organizations, they are collapsing at an alarming rate, removing the social glue that binds communities together.
And how does this psychological warfare manifest in the modern media landscape?
It manifests through systemic narrative control. Concerns that many people experience, whether they are anxieties about economic decline, the pace of demographic change, or the quality of public services, are routinely dismissed by powerful media outlets as fringe ideas or conspiracy theories, even when backed by statistical evidence or personal experience. The sources argue this is a deliberate tactic. By framing legitimate anxieties as xenophobia or anti-progress, the media invalidates the public's perception of reality.
And economic hardship gets blamed on individuals, not systems.
Right. It's often attributed to external factors like lazy workers or unskilled labor, deflecting attention from corporate offshoring or financial speculation.
And this manipulation is tied to the ownership of the information infrastructure itself.
That's the core claim regarding the dismantling of institutions. You have to consider the concentration of corporate media ownership. The sources highlight that asset managers like BlackRock, the world's largest, hold major shares in a vast array of media conglomerates, including News Corp, Comcast, and Paramount. This gives them immense centralized influence over media narratives.
That centralized influence is significant, but how does it impact local cohesion?
It's compounded by the gutting of local journalism. Private equity firms and hedge funds have systematically dismantled over 1,800 local newspapers across the U.S. since 2004. Think of it this way. If one financial entity owns the printing press for every local newspaper and significant national news channels, it's not that they directly dictate all the news, but they set the entire spectrum of what is considered relevant enough to be news in the first place. The elimination of local watchdog functions further destroys the community's ability to hold local power accountable and generates mass institutional distrust.
And Silicon Valley is an active participant in this, thriving on the isolation and fragmentation.
The sources are unequivocal that tech giants are not innocent bystanders. They are accused of deliberately suppressing dissenting views and knowingly amplifying content that is divisive, sensational, or emotionally charged.
Because angry users engage more.
Because angry users engage more. This is digital surveillance capitalism thriving on the loneliness and anxiety of a fractured populace, generating approximately $4 trillion USD annually. The suppression of certain voices under broad misinformation policies, even if well-intended in some cases, further destabilizes public trust in any kind of shared objective reality.
So the end game of this deliberate social engineering and fragmentation, according to this analysis, is pretty clear.
The motive is presented as simple. A distracted, atomized populace cannot organize and does not resist exploitation effectively. And most ominously, the erosion of national identity and trust enables governance by undemocratic global bodies, like the World Health Organization or the World Economic Forum. These organizations openly advocate for models like stakeholder capitalism, where powerful corporations effectively replace democratic processes. The failure of the small, individual, atomized consumer unit makes the entire population vulnerable to centralized transnational control.
Okay, now let's contrast that dramatically with China's model, which the sources describe as a machinery of stability built on preserving cohesion.
China presents a fundamentally different strategy. Its state-regulated information ecosystem is designed, above all else, to prioritize social stability over the profit-driven polarization we see in the West. They actively regulate their large tech giants, avoiding the rise of a digital oligarchy whose business model relies on manipulating and fracturing public opinion.
So what specifically acts as the grassroots firewall against the fragmentation that plagues the West?
China's stability is rooted in remarkably resilient grassroots community structures. The key institution here is the Neighborhood Committee, or BOO. These are not merely symbolic entities. They are highly functional, local organizations that resolve disputes, organize welfare services, manage public health efforts, and maintain public order. They provide a direct, two-way link between the central state and the community, ensuring immediate feedback and compliance.
That sounds like a hyper-efficient, low-cost governance model.
It is. These committees proved absolutely essential, for instance, in organizing compliance and resource distribution during the COVID-19 pandemic. It minimized the institutional confusion and distrust that characterized the Western response. This community structure acts as a vital extension of state capacity.
And culturally, they actively promote the values that support this collective identity.
Yes. Unlike the West, where individual autonomy is the highest value, the state actively promotes Confucian values that emphasize family duty, the collective good, and hierarchical respect. This actively counters Western hyperindividualism and moral relativism. Traditional cultural revival programs like promoting Han-Fu culture are actively supported to reinforce a shared identity.
And they maintained economic sovereignty.
Crucially, they avoided the neoliberal shock therapy and deindustrialization that devastated Western working-class communities, thus preserving community economic function and stability. And policies like common prosperity align business practices with national social objectives, prioritizing people over unchecked profits.
So in the West, the individual unit is deliberately fragmented for elite profit and control. In the East, the collective unit is actively preserved or institutionally supported for national stability and governance. This leaves people in the West seeking collective resilience outside of traditional family structures. Which brings us back to that intentional community counter model.
Right. We see this expressed in secular intentional communities like Twin Oaks, which we discussed earlier, for its resource efficiency. Founded in 1967, its core values, cooperation, egalitarianism, nonviolence, sustainability, and income sharing, are an explicit rejection of market-driven fragmentation. It's a genuine attempt to build a cohesive, fortress-like collective in a fractured society.
And structurally, how does that collective efficiency work for them without traditional asset accumulation?
The structural efficiency is remarkable because they socialize labor. Members work 38 hours a week, split between domestic labor like cooking and cleaning and income-producing labor like running community-owned businesses that manufacture tofu and hammocks. This provides all the basic necessities: housing, food, healthcare. Their long-term engagement with capitalism is actually attributed to the community's longevity. This system functions as an intentional escape from the atomizing forces of the labor market.
But escaping the market seems to come with its own unique trade-off regarding financial security.
It does. The critical trade-off is the inability to build individual equity or personal savings. While basic necessities are provided, without individual wealth accumulation like a retirement fund or home equity, members are financially reliant on the community. If they leave, they depart with little more than what they arrived with. And this highlights the profound difficulty of creating stable, collective wealth and intergenerational asset inheritance outside of the traditional family or state welfare structures in a capitalist system. It underscores that personal financial independence remains deeply linked to the ability to accumulate market assets, even for those actively trying to reject that very system. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the crisis we are witnessing, marked by low fertility, inflation, social instability, it isn't just a series of random economic shocks. It is the terminal vulnerability of the lone, atomized consumer unit when it's faced with coordinated systemic pressure. The East Asian model, rooted in familialism and Confucian values, treats the extended family unit as a high-efficiency economic fortress and a vital extension of state capacity. It's a low-cost governance model that is institutionally designed to promote social stability and demographic continuity.
So, what does this all mean for the friend I talked to who moved back into his family's renovated garage? The sources show that whether adopted consciously by highly individualistic Westerners facing economic collapse, or preserved institutionally in East Asia as a matter of civilizational strategy, the trend is the same. The collective unit is proving to be the single most realistic means of survival, wealth preservation, and social stability in an increasingly unstable world. The perceived burden of kinship, the time, the logistics, the interdependence, is being aggressively recalculated as the ultimate long-term security asset.
And the most profound observation here is that the return to collective living is not merely about surviving economic downturns or mitigating inflation. It is a proactive civilizational survival strategy. It prioritizes long-term demographic continuity, the ability to reproduce and care for subsequent generations, and physical asset inheritance over the short-sighted consumerism and civilizational entropy that characterize the decline of the modern Western core family model. The true test of resilience in the 21st century lies in who owns the future: the individual isolated and exposed by the market, or the collective unit bound by shared destiny and mutual defense.